TF-tubers are running out of ideas. It's a sentiment I've been hearing over and over again as the days go on, and honestly, I'm sick of it. There's so much more to say about Team Fortress 2 than the same boring ideas people have been regurgitating for the past decade. So, in an effort to break the mold, I'm going to discuss one of TF2's most underappreciated elements, something I've never seen anyone talk about before, and I'm going to challenge myself to make it as interesting and engaging as possible. Today, I'm going to talk about Team Fortress 2's font design. Oh boy. TF2 is a game with a very defined art style. And an important part of every game's art style is its typography, also known colloquially as its font design. A good font can help a game easily distinguish itself, as well as being a solid way of easing a player into what the setting or art direction will be like in the actual game. For instance, the Super Mario franchise font is one that's immediately recognizable. It's been used in the logos for multiple different games, and its angular cartoonish appearance forecasts what the stylings of Mario games are often like. It's a great encapsulation of the Super Mario art style and aesthetic, and makes marketing for the game much easier by adding an instant recognizability to every advertisement. In short, if you see this font, you immediately think of Mario. Team Fortress 2 has a font that offers a similar benefit, being used in several YouTube videos from the community as well as promotional materials from Valve themselves. This is the TF2 font family, comprised of 4 fonts entitled TF2, TF2 Secondary, TF2 Build, and TF2 Professor. The regular TF2 font is used for stylized pieces of the UI where a thinner font is needed, such as the Your Best Moments text in the loading screen. TF2 Secondary is wider, so it's often used in more significant pieces of the UI, such as the directions found at the beginning of each match. TF2 Build is the most important and iconic of this font family, being used for the majority of the major UI elements present in the game. TF2 Professor is a chalkboard version of the first font style, used almost exclusively for the Message of the Day pages that appear at the beginning of each match. These 4 fonts were specifically built in-house by Valve for TF2. The original development team for the game was very careful to make the game's art style and aesthetic consistent and readable to any player. So it was important for them to create a font that existed exclusively within TF2's world to maintain that immersion.
The more your art direction can use well-understood visual representations, the less work you have to do to explain your game elements.
This font family was created by Andrea Wickland, a former artist for Valve that did work for most of Valve's major hits in the mid to late 2000s and early 2010s. My favorite piece of her work outside of TF2 is the Ratman art, which you can find scribbled on the walls in Portal 1 and 2. She's also the proud owner of the most iconic hand in gaming history, as Andrea's hand was photographed for the cover of Left 4 Dead. Who could have guessed that this hand was the same hand that created some of the most iconic pieces of art in Valve history? Wickland's work consistently uses very loose line work that is very jagged and sharp, a trait that's reflected in her work on TF2's font. The letters' edges and strokes often protrude at odd angles, giving this font a more casual, cartoonish look. What's fascinating is that the traits of this font resemble the cel-shaded look that TF2's visuals have, as the characters and environmental assets are often depicted with similarly jagged edges to outline their character models. It's obvious that Wickland's goal was to make a set of fonts that closely resembled Team Fortress 2's art style, while keeping the type simple so it could be easily read and modified for promotional material. In this goal, she absolutely overachieved. It's not really mentioned often, but TF2 is one of the few games where its font is so recognizable and versatile that it's consistently used by the community itself for fan-made material and promotion. You also kind of see this with Overwatch's Big Noodle Tilting Oblique, yes, that's the real name, but Team Fortress 2 was really the first game where YouTubers and community figures used the font that the game has as a way to make their content easily identifiable. However, a new font has been rising in notoriety over the past couple years, as some TF-tubers have swapped from the font that TF2 inspired to a font that inspired TF2. This is Compacta, a font family made by Fred Lambert that's been publicly used for the past several decades. It's one of the most slept-on fonts in the public eye, a sleeper hit that's been part of some of the most iconic pieces of pop culture in recent history. The Rolling Stones have used it, 21 Pilots has it on the cover of their best album, and of course, Team Fortress 2's logo is made from Compacta's bold counterpart. But why this font over something made in-house like TF2 Build, or something more recognizable like Impact? Well, to answer that question, we actually need to look at TF2's setting and lore. For those unaware, TF2 takes place in 1960s America, and many of its weapons, maps, and characters are directly inspired by events taking place in or prior to that time period. The appearance of TF2 was meticulously tuned by the devs and artists to resemble a cartoonish caricature of international 60s pop culture. So when it came to designing Team Fortress 2's iconic logo, Compacta was likely chosen because of its historical relevance to the time period. While Impact wasn't widely recognized until its appearance as a font choice in Windows 95, Compacta was used in a variety of different pieces of pop culture almost immediately from its inception in 1963. I bet you didn't think this and this used the same font. If you wanted a bold logo in the mid to late 1900s, Compacta was the go-to way to achieve that aesthetic. The inclusion of the font in TF2's logo seems to be an homage to this period of typography, a small yet significant way to signal the time period in which the game takes place. Compacta's companion font, Compacta Black, was used in the text splashes that appeared at the beginning of all the Meet the Team animations. This is also the version of Compacta that's become even more commonly used in the thumbnails of a few select iconic TF2 YouTube videos. Who knows if elmaxo would still have a career if he couldn't use this font as a crutch, am I right? While we're talking about the Meet the Team splashes, I might as well go over the font used for the names of each class. This type is known as Black Oak Standard, and is a font bundled with the various Adobe professional programs the devs likely used for these text splashes. Though this connection with Adobe is probably why the font was used, rather than any historical significance, I do find it somewhat interesting that this font was modeled after Smithsonian wood prints, such as the one seen here. This gives the font an old-timey Western appearance, which explains why it fits so well in shorts that take place mostly in the desert or sandy areas. Another font with an interesting connection is this one, found on a few signs in the Man vs. Machine game mode. Do you recognize it? Well, maybe not in this state, but if you italicize it and scrunch it up a little bit, how about now? Alright, well, what if I do this? Yep, that's right. The quintessential Overwatch font, Big Noodle Tilting Oblique, is represented in TF2 through its less oblique, more normal form. Out of all of the connections between Overwatch and TF2, this has gotta be the most insignificant, and I'm truly honored that I get to be the one to point it out. Most dev teams see their font design and typography as an afterthought, something to be ignored until the very last minute and then slapped onto the game's text like an Instagram filter. Even some of my all-time favorite games have this problem. Developers can put countless of hours of thoughts, time, and effort into crafting the ideal gameplay experience, but then completely drop the ball when it comes time to pick the fitting font. And this issue can stick out like a sore thumb. In most games, the font used for text boxes and assets will be the most common piece of art the player sees throughout the game, except for maybe the main character's model and texture. You would think that this would lead to custom fonts being more common throughout the gaming industry, as they're a key way to assuredly differentiate one game from the rest. However, that just isn't the case. The fonts used in Team Fortress 2 are indicative of one thing. The developers that this game once had really cared about it. The amount of effort and attention to detail that once went into this game is absolutely immaculate. Of course, there's a couple of popular videos going over how great the art style, team recognition, and color palettes are, but this game's visual design really comes together in the smaller things. Imagine if the text chat and other default text boxes use something like, Arial instead of the much more aesthetic Verdania Bold. Sure, it might be passable, but it doesn't fill the screen as well or stand out over the background. No, the TF2 devs took the extra step and picked what they considered to be the ideal default font. And on top of that, they commissioned an in-house artist to make 4 separate fonts exclusive to the game, because without them, the UI might go from this to this, and the devs just couldn't face that reality. These fonts are part of what makes Team Fortress 2 so recognizable, what's made the game ageless in the current landscape of modern shooters. They are demonstrative of an attention to detail that's lost in this era of gaming, a desire to make sure everything lines up and the player's immersion is constantly maintained. Without these fonts, who knows how much more derivative TF2's marketing and UI would feel. Perhaps TF2 wouldn't feel as bold as it does today.